Danke. Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me as president of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy to welcome you tonight to our pre-evening of our European Forum. It is happening already the 28th time that this European Forum Vienna was organized for the first time, because our institute was founded in 1995 when Austria joined EU and NATO Partnership for Peace, and we decided that it would be necessary also to accompany it and follow it very closely with the think tank. And it's a great pleasure for me, of course, to welcome a few special guests. I will not be able to to talk about everybody and to welcome everybody, but of course it's for me a great pleasure to greet in a special way our honorary president, Her Excellency Benita Ferrero-Waldner. She was our foreign minister, she was our commissioner. Welcome, and she's the honorary president. Next to her, it's always a great pleasure to welcome Christine Muttonen, long-time member of the Austrian Parliament and speaker for foreign policy, but also a former president of the OSCE General Assembly, and therefore a hearty welcome also to you. We expect also Jutta Ethofer, who is responsible for security policy in the Chancellery, and also Susanne Weber. I have not seen them yet, but it's a great pleasure also, of course, to welcome a few ambassadors. On the one hand, Christian Strohal, Thomas Buxbaum, and of course also especially you, dear friend Wölfer. It's a great pleasure to have so many people here who are maybe for the first time here, and therefore I want to say we will start tomorrow very exactly in the morning, because we have a big program tomorrow, and therefore we also try to prepare already this room for tomorrow. So far not every place is filled tonight. For tomorrow it should be filled, and I'm looking forward to do so. We have a lot of our big agenda to talk about. And I have to say, you know, that when we initiated to organize this European Forum Vienna, we thought sometime what should be the title. And we decided that it should be about Europe's future. And we have a subtitle that says, Time to Decide and Time to Act. Why did we choose this title? Because we are convinced that it is highly time to decide more than we did in the past, and especially to act more than what has happened in the past. What do I mean? If I look back, you know, I have a little experience what has happened in Europe in the last decades. It was my privilege to initiate and organize the first defense minister meeting of Europe here in Vienna. A year thereafter, we had the Helsinki goals. The Helsinki goals that said already that Europe should have 60,000 armed forces, at the latest in 2003. And if I look back, or if I look to the situation now, we still have defense ministers which are not a council yet. And I do not see 60,000, I do not see 50,000 or 40,000 or whatever soldiers. And this in a time when Europe is challenged in a way that it has not been in the last decades. And therefore I think it's a great pleasure not only to talk about it, but we should take it as a moment also in order to prepare ourselves more or less to force politics a little bit more to act, to decide and to act. And maybe we can learn even something from the other side of the Atlantic. Yeah, what do we want to learn tonight? Of course, we will be talking about navigating EU's security policy, not only theoretically, but especially also on our most important incident, which is the war in Ukraine. And this will be made and moderated by the director of our institute, Michael Zinkanell. And I do not want to talk anymore. I just want to hand over and wish you all the best. We are looking forward. What is your opinion? What is your analysis? And what is your perspective for the future of European security policy?
Thank you very much, Dr. Fasselabend, President of the AIES, for your introductory remarks. Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's also my great pleasure to welcome you here at the day one of our European Forum, the 28th European Forum, with the title, as we heard already, Europe's Future, Time to Decide, Time to Act. And today's panel discussion we have put under the title Navigating European Security Policy. And navigating in that sense was chosen not by accident, but intentionally, because you have to navigate through difficult times, you have to navigate through difficult and uncertain waters, and navigating European security policy should therefore also symbolize that we are living now in Europe in these challenging and difficult times where more decisive action, where more decisive decision making is absolutely necessary. And the reason for that is, of course, one of the main reasons is that the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine is almost lasting for 1,000 years already. 1,000 days, I'm sorry, 1,000 days already, sorry. Yeah, sorry. 1,000 days, but 10 years, this is why I made this Freudsche Versprecher, as we say, 10 years already since the Russian annexation of Crimea and the conflict in eastern Ukraine. And certainly this Russian aggression is one of the most significant challenges for European security today. However, if we look at just the last couple of days, just yesterday, there was a decisive day as well, the re-election of President Trump as the US president, which we also will certainly mention, but also the failure or the discontinuation of the German Ampelregierung, the German government. And if you're asking yourself right now, why does this affect us here sitting in beautiful Austria and wonderful Vienna, let me just mention one aspect, the new Austrian security strategy, which was just adopted 2 or 3 months ago, which clearly also states that the Russian aggression in Ukraine is the most decisive element of threat of insecurity for European security, for Austrian security, that we're directly affected by that. And despite the fact that we're a neutral country, a neutral state in the heart of Europe, we must not be bystanders to this conflict and to this war, especially because our neutrality is also affected by that in the sense that international law is violated, that territorial integrity is violated, and the sovereignty of the state of Ukraine is under attack. So, without any further ado, I would like to introduce the panel for tonight. We have 4 wonderful speakers for you with us today. I'll start to my right. We're joined by Judy Dempsey, non-resident senior fellow at Carnegie Europe. Judy, you have been editor-in-chief for the Strategic Europe blog from 2012 to 24. Many of you probably know you because you have an international renowned career as journalist and diplomatic correspondent with different news outlets all across Europe. Thank you very much, Judy, for being with us. On my left, we are joined by Yurii Buhai. Yurii, you are a Reform Support Officer at the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Prior to joining the armed forces in Ukraine, you have implemented a foundation for e-health transformation in Ukraine, but you also contributed to innovative reforms for Ukraine's procurement system. Then we are joined to, again, my very right, by Alina Nychyk. Alina, you're a research fellow. Sorry? From my perspective. Yeah. Alina, you're a research fellow in Zurich at the Zurich University for Applied Sciences. Your research focus lies on Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russian-Ukrainian dimension, but also EU enlargement and Ukraine's accession process to the European Union. Your academic, prior to your academic career, you have also worked in the private sector, but also in the European Parliament and European Commission. And then, last but certainly not least, Denis Cenuşă. You're an associate expert focusing on Eastern Europe, associate expert at the Eastern Europe Studies Center, and in addition also program director. You're focusing on energy security, on analytical questions regarding critical infrastructure, but the fact that you're originally from Moldova, I'm sure that we can also speak a little bit about the developments in Moldova, because politically and also in regards to the EU accession, there have been, of course, also some critical developments in the recent past. I would like to start, Judy, with your introductory remarks for today's discussion, especially focusing on something that you wrote during the summer in Strategic Europe for Carnegie. You wrote that we as Europeans are unprepared for the tectonic shifts that are taking place in the US, already referring to a potential second presidency of Trump. And you also mentioned that Europe has the chance now to step up, but its leaders are lacking courage. So I'd like to challenge you in that, due to the fact that we know now that President Trump will be the next president, and your assessment of the US election and what the implications are for European security.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you very much for your kind words. And thank you for inviting me. It's the first time, I feel embarrassed. It's the first time I've been at this Diplomatic Academy. It's a very nice building. And it's nice to see old faces, but not old faces, but people who have an institutional memory. And this is very, very important. And what you said about the Helsinki goals, we can even talk about the Tony Blair and Chirac idea as well, and that the battalions and brigades never got off the ground. I'm going to keep my remarks very short, because I think I'm sure the audience will have many questions. Time to decide, time to act. Excuse me, how many times have we heard this? We have had so many opportunities, even during the Bush administration, the son. I mean, he was very critical of European lack of preparedness to defense, take over the defense, look after their own security. And then comes Donald Trump, and then the hand-wringing, and then the complaint, oh, this is terrible, Trump is going to get rid of NATO. What did we do? We didn't introduce reforms. We didn't pull together. We didn't actually navigate towards a common defense policy. And so Trump castigated us, and quite rightly so as well, because Europeans do have to look after the security and share it with the United States and the United States' other interests. So we muddled through the 4 years, and anybody who thinks that the EU thrives from a crisis, it actually doesn't. It muddles through. Then the next 4 years comes in, and Biden, oh great, we've got the Democrats now. What do? We still don't prepare. We wait, and then some of us knew that Trump was going to get his machine together. And I just want to alert you to the fact that Trump is ready this time. He's been building up a fantastically expert team to suit his agenda. So we shouldn't be surprised. What is depressing is that we are not prepared. So, why are we not prepared? There's a fundamental problem now facing the European Union, and this has been developing for, say, in the Merkel days, the former Chancellor of Germany. What is happening is, I don't want to use jargon, but intergovernmental rules. The member states are calling the shots left, right, and centre. Doesn't matter whether it's in Germany, whether it's in Scandinavian countries, whether it's in Hungary, Spain, Italy. The member states are actually holding up the role of the Commission, the executive, to actually push through serious change. This change should be actually focused on integration. But integration is now a taboo word. The member states don't want it. They're looking after their own interests. This is one of the fundamental problems, that it actually stops a common idea of how to form a consensus on defence and security. The second problem is, and this really has to be said, the member states, even if there was a kind of quasi-common idea of defence, they don't trust each other. And even though President Macron has reached out, for instance, to Poland and the Baltic states, there's an inherent suspicion that, given Macron's idea of strategic autonomy, there's a kind of suspicion, oh, he wants to break Europe away from NATO and weaken NATO. I think it's a bit misplaced, frankly. We must never underestimate the very close intelligence links between Washington and Paris. And we saw the whole situation in Chad and the Sahel. It's such a disaster. But Washington and Paris worked so closely on this idea of logistics, on intelligence sharing, and so on. So we should get this in our minds. But at the bottom, at the end of the day, there is still this suspicion of the Gaullist tradition running European defence. The other big issue is that, and this is really very, very fundamental, that inside the European Union, leaving aside the growing role of the member states, which hold back integration, which hold back unity, actually the big engine between Paris and Berlin no longer functions. It really doesn't. And I must say, I was a great fan. I'm not meant to say I'm a fan of anybody, but I really supported Macron's Élysée, the Sorbonne speeches. I thought they were very interesting, very moving, intellectually demanding, honest about what Europe should do. Merkel never replied to him. No matter how many speeches he gave, Merkel just sat there. Angela Merkel never gave a major speech on the future of Europe. And in fact, she was very much an intergovernmental leader. And Olaf Scholz, whatever happens to him in the future, he's never really pushed the agenda for Europe. Why not? Why is it that the member states don't see what is at stake? Why hasn't Russia's attack on Ukraine shaken Europe to the core, to the extent that the Europeans must understand that the comfort zone is over, that their security is at stake, and what Ukraine is doing is actually protecting our security. And we are not reciprocating in giving Ukraine the security it needs, firstly. Secondly, there's, and I think the Americans should be even more critical of the Europeans. The security umbrella which the Americans have provided, and by the way, Austria can take advantage of this and ride on the back of this security umbrella, as indeed my country, Ireland, can too. We became intellectually complacent in one way. Oh, well, the Americans will bail us out. Yeah, we've got the security guarantee from them. Well, it's not a given anymore. Europe is very, very fragile now. And Putin knows exactly all the divisions in Europe and how he can play countries off each other. For instance, look what's happening in your neighbour, Slovakia, and in Hungary. But I'm puzzled by the fact that Ukraine hasn't shaken Europe to the point that leaders will say, enough is enough, we have to pull together, we need a common, serious defence, security and intelligence policy. And the European member states are not prepared to do this. The Baltics understand this, the Poles understand this, the Swedes understand this, the Scandinavians understand this. And why do you think Finland joined NATO? Because they know and they knew that the European Union wouldn't develop a proper defence policy. And so now we have Sweden and NATO, Sweden and Finland in NATO, and the EU is still going on, well, we might get a procurement strategy here, or we pull together here. And when there's a problem in Europe, what do? They set up a committee. Oh, well, maybe we'll have a defence commissar, or this, that, and the other. It's always a new committee instead of action. And the final point I would like to make is that Europe is in for a very, very tough time. We have a situation, and Trump is going to be quite consequent in what and transactional and consequent. We're going to have a very tough time with trade. We're going to have a very tough time on American demands on defense. And actually, this is the crux or the paradox of the situation. If the United States wants the Europeans to take their defense and security much more seriously, then the Americans will have to accept that the Europeans must be able to shop around and not just buy American kit. And this is a big problem, actually. About 40–50%, even more, especially the German armaments and the French and the Italians, so much of this comes from the United States. So the United States has to be honest. Okay, Europe, you want to do your own security? Well, then there must be much more sharing of the whole military-industrial complexes on this side of the Atlantic and on the other side of the Atlantic. One little point, and then I'll stop here. There's a discussion going on among all the airlines in Europe today. Why? Because of the Boeing strike. Why? Because Boeing couldn't deliver the components and things that function as spare parts for the airline industry in Europe. And there was talk next summer or next winter, well, we'll have to cut back the airlines. This just shows how vulnerable we are, that actually, if things go seriously wrong in the transatlantic relationship, Europe is not ready in terms of armaments, in terms of military capabilities, in terms of security. And despite all the talk about sharing and pooling and capabilities, we haven't gone anywhere near this. And my last point is logistics. Frankly, how can you have logistics when you have different actual radio signals coming from all the member states they don't share? They have 12 different helicopter systems, they have 12 different tank systems, they have radios which cannot interconnect. This was the whole failure of Afghanistan when the Europeans went in there. So essentially, time to navigating Europe's security policy, well, navigating also implies ships, and we don't have them. Thank you.
That's true. Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you for starting with pointing out that trusting each other is probably at the core. And from there, there's a necessity to move forward, because there will also not be an integration of systems without trust and trusting each other. Yurii, you are currently at the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, being at the Reform Support Office. What are your perspectives, what are your assessments, first of all, on what we can expect from the next couple of months on the military dimension in Ukraine, but especially how you also assess the re-election of Trump and how it might be affecting Ukraine?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation. I will actually start with 1,000 years or 1,000 days. So 1,000 years ago, it was 1024. St. Sophia's Cathedral was already built in Kiev, following the examples of Byzantine. The Moscow would appear in 200 years since then. So back. Sorry.
Maybe we can.
Okay, yeah, good. Thank you for emphasizing it, yeah. So I will try to repeat the story, and I will start with 1,000 years or 1,000 days, the comment which Michael made maybe by mistake, but 1,000 years ago, it was 1024. So in Ukraine, in Kiev, St. Sophia's Cathedral was already built, following the examples of Byzantine. It's still there. You can come to Kiev and see it. The beauty of Oranta and the examples of Byzantine art. 1,000 years ago, Moscow was not even there yet. So it would appear in 200 years later. And actually, why I do comment on this point, and I will finish my talk overall with coming back to this intro. Because a lot of the people in Europe still believe that the war in Ukraine is about the territory. It's not about the territory at all. It also shows all our things when we want to push Ukraine or anyone to discuss or negotiate the territories. The war in Ukraine for Russia is not about the territory. Russia wants to take the whole of Ukraine because the history of Russia is not consistent without Kiev, even without Ukraine. So that's actually, I will try to, based on this premise, I will try to show my views how the war will be happening. But I would like to start with the story still. And to my mind, 2008 comes. It was July. I was still a student, third-year student. I was on a training camp. I did some sport, not as much as I do now, but I did some sport. It was actually on the coast of the Black Sea. We went there for 3 weeks. After staying there for 2 weeks, a boss of mine, my actually mentor and teacher, he called from Kiev and said that, Yurii, you need to come to Kiev. The war in Georgia started. Crimea will be the next. We need to learn how they're using information for their hybrid war. So we need to get prepared. It was 2008. He was not the only one in Ukraine who was saying it. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people were saying the same in Europe. Europe just did not hear it. Then 2008 we remember quite well. 2009, economic crisis, financial crisis. We'll think about this kind of things. And we somehow forget about the first breach of international order. Then the next data which I would like to emphasize, it was 2014. And between 2008 and 2014, I lived in Europe. I lived in Estonia, in Norway, in Germany, in the Czech Republic, in many, many, many countries. So I did feel myself being a European. And why I do remember 2013, 2014? Because that's when Maidan and the revolution started in Kiev. And for me, it was, at that point, a very strange feeling, because in Kiev, I saw the willingness of Ukrainians to feel themselves European. So we saw the value of being European. We had a lot of values associated with Europe. I think that not accidentally, the revolution was called the revolution of dignity. And for us, this value of dignity was associated with Europe as one of the foundational rights which Europe is based on. But the feeling of myself being in Europe and looking at all these intergovernmental fights, not having a common even discussion what Europe is, created a feeling that the Europe itself actually lost the understanding of why the European Union was formed, what Europe went through in the 20th century. Then the war started in February and March, and when I was in July 2008, I saw it was the beginning of a wonderful life, being a student. I think that everyone remembers his dreams and visions when he or she is a student. But for me, since then, it started, as I said, firstly crisis, then the revolution, and then the war came in my life. I never expected that the war at some point would come to my life. I could not imagine it. I was also a believer, as Europe is nowadays, that the war is somewhere there. But then just one day comes, and the war comes into your home, and you can't say, I don't want it. You should be ready to do something else, and you should be able to act to defend your home. And when we arrived today in Vienna, I think the feeling is more or less like this in Europe, apart from some countries, apart from the Northern Baltic, from northern countries, from Baltics, from the UK maybe a bit, but for sure it's not present in Germany, it's not present in France, it's not present here. But as my boss was telling myself in 2008 that Crimea is going to be the next and we need to prepare for it, Ukraine has been shouting for 10 years, Europe, the war is here. And Russia is an empire which wants to resurrect. And the empires does not have borders. That's actually the most repeated statement of President Putin, that Russia does not have any borders. That's the message which is sent, sorry, but to the face of Europe, that we are going to come with you with a war. Actually, with the war, they already came, because hybrid is still a part of the war. Only the conventional, non-conventional arms are not used yet. So I think that I would like actually to summarize. I will follow up also a bit on the question of what the election of Trump means for us and for Ukraine and what the situation in Ukraine is. But I think that these two things that Ukraine is telling currently Europe that the war is near your border. You need to act. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. The second thing, that we still believe in Europe. We still believe in the ideals, in the values which Europe presents for the world. And we believe that Europe can believe in itself, can build itself, including also military equipment and other things. And that's actually my answer to the situation with Trump elections. Being a military, I cannot comment much on the political situation. But regardless of what happens in the US, we believe in Europe, and it means that Europe needs finally to wake up, as Judy mentioned in the entry with her entry points. And when we talk about how situation is developing in Ukraine, situation is, I think that quite a lot of people in this room follows in your situation, is difficult. But I think to explain, I will try to answer briefly, but explain in more detail how situation is in Ukraine. I think that prior to understanding the answer for the question, the Europe needs to understand, and overall the world needs to understand why a 3-day war is lasting the 3rd year. Because in order to understand why Ukraine fights, how Ukraine organizes itself, how we can survive without 6 months of support from the US, you need to understand Ukraine. And Ukraine was never studied. People who studied Russia, they used the same lenses, they would try to understand Ukraine, but it doesn't work like this. It was good for us because Russia used the same lenses, the West used the same lenses, and they gave us 3 days. But still somehow not 3 days. So my answer to the situation is very difficult. It will be almost impossible for us to survive as a state without support from our allies. But Ukrainians will fight. Will fight because, for once again, this war, since empires don't have any borders. Russianism is an ideology which is not about the territory, but about the approaches which they use in the war. We understand that if they come and take the whole of Ukraine, Buchas and other cities will repeat in each and every city. So we don't have much a choice. So we will fight. But for that, we need Europe to believe in itself, to join as much and as soon as possible to support us in this fight. Then we might have a chance to have a more or less secure and peaceful Europe. Thank you. I will follow on the question.
Thank you very much, Yurii. It's of course very interesting and also emotional to hear that 2008 from your personal background, from your personal story, was such a decisive year. If we go back from 2008 to the mid-90s, we can even trace it to Moldova and to Transnistria. Probably we can hear then also a little bit on Moldova later, but certainly this necessity to wake up Europe is there. Maybe Europe is somewhat of a sleeping beauty. The question is who will come along and kiss us awake. I hope it's maybe Trump as a unusual suspect, but maybe this is exactly what we need to be more awakened, as a critical remark. Alina, I think that you have also prepared some slides and a presentation for us.
I will stand up.
Yes, please. I think that you can also give us a little bit of a perspective from the foreign policy perspective. I know that you're also researching on Ukraine's foreign policy. So thank you very much for giving us also your expertise and your remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming to us tonight. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here and to discuss this important topic. And I was very pleasantly surprised how my presentation, what I want to talk about, is in line with the previous speakers. I think we sense the issues in the same way and we see the same solution. So I'm very happy that at least we here understand this. I will talk a bit about past as well and about current situation and the future. And I will present you with some parts of my research as a scholar, with some also interesting interviews with policymakers, with some European policymakers. And talking again very much in line, which was mentioned already, so EU and Russia relations before 2014, not expecting, not knowing Russia or whatever. So I have this very interesting citation. I don't know how many times I mentioned it at different conferences, but I think it's amazing. It shows this misperception, misunderstanding. It was said by former European Union's ambassador to Russia, and it was about annexation of Crimea, about 2014, the war in Donbass. And he said that there was some intelligence reporting. Even there was some researchers who have alerted about possible military actions, so Russia against Ukraine. But the common sense, right, among European Union's leaders was, no, that's impossible. No, Kremlin will not go that far, because agreements with the West have been important. It comes that this common sense was not really common sense. Do you feel some déjà vu? Do you feel that it was the same in 2022? We had already open intelligence, right? Not only among diplomats. We had open intelligence from US that, yes, that's coming. But European decision makers, also Ukrainians, didn't believe that it may come. Also, you had everything there, but it was the common sense, right? Common sense, no, that cannot happen. That's amazing. And so I wanted to mention a few European Union's mistakes since 2014. So first of all, poor reaction to annexation of Crimea, again, which was mentioned before, but let us repeat because we don't learn, yes? I found out from my interviews with Ukrainian decision makers who were actually in contact with the EU that the EU asked Ukrainians not to respond to annexation of Crimea, and that was one of the reasons why Ukraine actually did not respond so much to annexation of Crimea, and the EU promised to solve the issue with Russia, which did not happen. Then there was the war in Donbass, and Ukrainians already did not trust the EU that they will solve it because they saw it with Crimea. And then again, there was poor reaction to Russia's war in Donbass from EU. Then there were Minsk agreements, and Russia was violating them. And again, there were poor reaction of EU to violation of Minsk agreement. There were some sanctions, right? There was symbolic limited sanctions, but mostly it was business as usual for all these years before 2022. And there was also this saint belief, you know, this from Berlin, now there is understanding coming, that this belief in changing Russia via trade. So if we trade with aggressor, if we give them money, so maybe they will become peaceful and democratic and good people, right? But now there is already a lot of understanding, yeah, by German politicians also, that it was because Germany was the main promoter of this changing aggressors via trade. And let us remember that one of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed, it was not because the West was giving it money, but because it was isolated, because it was economically isolated. So you cannot change aggressor via giving them money to develop their military, right? And there were always these illusions about security in Europe, that yes, the war is happening somewhere there, and we have our peaceful garden Europe. But now it's already different. Yes, in 2022, we have much bigger EU response. Still there are some possibilities to improve, but there is better understanding after 2022 that the war is happening. And I want to give you citations from Austrian diplomat, since we are in Austria. I'm not telling you the name because it was an anonymous interview. So he said that before 2022, there was belief in Austria that you can trade together, you can create winners on both sides, and in the long run it will work out. But now he says, now all of this is different. You cannot back to the past. You cannot go back to shaking hands and playing little economic games, which were advantages for Austria, for sure. But now you have to face the music. So you have now, situation is changing. Yes, we want more, but it's already better. So what do we have now in 2022? From my recent interviews in Brussels, I hear that this war is black and white. But for Ukrainians, for Eastern Europeans, that war was already black and white. But for some in Europe, it was still gray zone. You can say, yeah, let us buy this gas. Yeah, it was green man in Crimea. We don't know what was happening, right? But now you cannot say it like this. Now it's already black and white. And we see already some reawakening of European Union geopolitical actorness. Some would argue, yes, it's not real geopolitical actors. We see some movement there. We see already something happening. So we have 14 comprehensive packages of sanctions, right? We have decrease of energy dependency on Russia. Still 15% of gas import of EU still comes from Russia. So still there is a way to isolate Russia more. We have freezing of Russian assets. We have also military assistance to Ukraine and financial aid to Ukraine as well. And we have resurrection of enlargement, which is my recent topic. So if you want to ask me about enlargement, you're very much welcome. But here I will move forward. And since I'm now based in Switzerland, I wanted to mention that Switzerland also joined most of EU sanctions and froze Russian assets. But I also want to mention that it's not something unusual. Switzerland also joined before UN sanctions against other countries. So it's not something that it's happening only now. And I was also asked to talk about Austrian-Swiss neutrality, which is a very interesting topic, interesting for me, since I'm Ukrainian. We are also neutral, and we hope that, yes, we are peaceful, and that will save us. And I want to tell you a story. I was organizing a conference half a year ago in March in Switzerland. And it was mainly academic conference, but we had a panel with policymakers. And we have representatives of EU, of Swiss Foreign Ministry, and we had as analyst Anders Saslund, whom some of you may know. He's a very famous analyst analyzing different governments against the world, around the world. And he's in US now, and I totally forgot that he's Swedish also. And the first thing, he's joined our conference, he's joined online. And the first thing, he knows that we're in Switzerland, so we have the same neutrality. And the first thing he's saying, so I'm drinking for Swedish joining NATO today. It was the same day when Sweden joined NATO. And then we had very interesting discussion between him as a Swedish that his country rejected neutrality because of changing geopolitical situation, and between this representative of Swiss Foreign Ministry. And so in Switzerland, this discussion about neutrality is going on, yes, but at the moment it's not changing. And just to open the discussion about Austrian neutrality, if you want to, this representative of Swiss Foreign Ministry said, Switzerland is not so close to Russia, but it's also not that far. So my question is, how far is Austria from Russia? So now, with Russian ambitions, with the war is going on, and if, as some politicians here also argue, if the war is stopped and the whole Ukraine is given to Russia, if Ukraine is occupied by Russia, how far is then this zone of instability from Austria? So just to think and to open it. And I hope I'm not taking that much time. That's my last slide about the future. So is peace possible? How peace is possible? And I wanted to tell you, to show you some statistics from Ukraine and from Russia. So as for Ukraine, 1 year ago, 80% of Ukrainians wanted the whole territory back, including Donbas and Crimea. Now the situation is changing a bit. It's already not 80%, but 55% of Ukrainians want the whole territory back, all occupied territory back. Then if you ask the question differently, if you offer NATO membership, NATO is important because it's the only option to guarantee Ukraine's security, plus EU membership, and postponement of liberation of occupied territories, then 47% would accept this. And you know, you heard probably about Zelensky victory plan. He wants NATO membership now, possibility to attack Russian military on its territory, economic development of Ukraine, and a few other points. I'm not going to discuss this very deeply now. And very banal thing, but I think we need to remind ourselves this as well, that Ukraine is fighting for its survival, and I want to tell you a phrase which you probably heard, but let us remind it again, that if Russia stops the war, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops the war, there will be no Ukraine, right? Is it possible for Russia to stop the war? So unfortunately, Russia still has a lot of resources. Russia managed to reorient its economy. So sanctions are good, yes, it's very good, the West is united, but Russia has partners. It has Iran, China, India, it has North Korea. So unfortunately, let us accept the reality. It's not the world is united against Russia, the world is divided. What do we have in Russia? 80% of Russians support Putin. 76% of Russians support actions of Russian army in Ukraine. So let us not repeat this mistake that it's Putin's war, because individual Russians who want this, 76% of Russians support the killing of Ukrainian civilians and everything which is happening in Ukraine. So the recent polling data from Levada, you can check it online in English. There is no civil society in Russia, no realistic better leader. So often when I say this, someone will stand up and say, no, but I know this person in Russia, he posted something on Facebook and another person was staying with a poster. So I'm not saying that there are no individual Russians who are against Putin, but on there is extensive research of my colleagues on this, that on the scale of Russia, there is no civil society in Russia. There is no realistic better leader. There are options of even someone worse coming to power. And Russia cannot give up as well because it's survival of Putin's regime. He built his regime that he needs external threats, the war, and he unites Russia with this. So there are very limited options for him to go out of this. And that's all from me. Let us discuss further and find our solutions for these European problems.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alina. Since you have mentioned distance, the distance from here, from Vienna to Ukraine, is closer than to Switzerland. If you take a look at the direct line, so probably we should also consider that here in Austria, that distance-wise, Ukraine is really not very far away from us here in Austria, and even one more reason why this war should matter more to us, and we should be more aware that it affects us here in Austria as well. Dennis, we have already mentioned briefly also Moldova. The situation in Moldova is, of course, a very interesting, a very evolving one now with the presidential elections just on Sunday, the second round of the elections, but also the referendum to join the European Union, despite the fact, as we have also mentioned, that hybrid threats do also play a role in Moldova heavily. So maybe you can share some of your expertise with us on these dimensions and developments.
Yeah, thank you. You hear me, right? So that we don't have the same situation. You know, I was preparing for this event, and I'm coming from Vilnius, where we discussed about the future of Eastern Partnership region, as well as what to do, what kind of strategy the EU should have in the Black Sea region. And we came up with different ideas. What I was really happy about is that finally the EU wants to have a strategy for the Black Sea region, and that something will be presented next year. As well as I have learned that Polish, this was not in Vilnius, but from other exchanges with my colleagues, that that Polish presidency that will basically chair the Council of Europe next year will also work on the future of Eastern Partnership region, which means that these two projects will be advanced. Most likely we will see much more. But why I'm mentioning these two dimensions and these two projects, because Moldova, Ukraine, and other countries to the east from Austria, they are all part of these dimensions that have been launched in 2009 or 2007, if we speak about the Black Sea Synergy, which is exactly the project that is used to ensure development across the Black Sea. So in a way, the EU is present, the EU is doing something, but I believe that what Judy mentioned is that probably the focus is not there, it's not on the right issues. And one of the issues that has been mentioned, by the way, that was also very interesting and is somehow linked, is tying very nicely with our today's conversation, is that security was missing, you know, both in case of Eastern Partnership region as well as in the Black Sea Synergy. It was no mentioning about security, hard security, but actually any traces of any other security. Only after the COVID crisis, we have seen that the EU has inserted in the Eastern Partnership projects this humanitarian, or not humanitarian, but human dimension of security, as well as healthcare related issues, again, linked to security. And in a way, like the EU is reacting to the urgency of paying more attention to the security, but it's doing that after crises. So something should happen in order for the EU to understand that this is a matter of life and death if we speak about Ukraine today. So when I was looking into what I could really bring to this conversation, I thought that first of all, probably it makes sense to really mention the European political community that is taking place right now, but in Budapest. We speak about the 5th event, which is gathering 47 leaders. They are now talking about issues that are related to our region and that are related about security as well, related to security. And I was looking which are the key topics that they are going to, in a way, dissect and look into the specifics. And many of them are familiar to you, but I would like just to list them so that we have, again, this kind of reality check. So the first one is migration, which is about borders, obviously Russia's war, and this is about Ukraine, to support Ukraine, to continue the support for Ukraine. Two other topics which in my view are critical, and I will explain why, because my presentation is tackling these two aspects. One is economic security, and the other one is connectivity. And here I would like to really structure my presentation into speaking about three important dimensions. The first one, it's about social contract. I call it social contract. It's a block of observations that I would like to bring up and to add to our conversation, because I believe that if you don't have economic security, unfortunately, you'll not have any other sort of security. That's my understanding. And when I was looking into the data that are official, they are provided by Eurostat. You can check out, you can Google them, you'll find the same. I was looking for what exactly is happening in terms of poverty in Europe. And I found three interesting statistics. So one is about the people at risk for poverty. And the EU average, this is for 2023, is that 21.4% of the population of Europe, it's without the UK, is at risk to become poor and to be obviously excluded, right? These people usually are voting for right-wing or for political parties that are not really happy with the EU, and they are not going to build the trust that you mentioned. And they're going to put a lot of pressure, and they're going to be used by Russia as a proxy. So another concerning figure is housing costs. And we speak about cost of living. This is a crisis. It's happening in many, by the way, many developed countries, in the Netherlands, France, maybe not so much Germany, but I think in Germany is also emerging. And we have about 10% of the population whose costs for paying the rent is exceeding the income. And 10%, it's about 40 million, more or less, of people. And then the third important figure, it's about energy poverty. And why energy poverty is important? Unfortunately, when the winter is kicking off, and Vienna is a very cold place, right? You think about the bills and how to pay them. And you go back to the same vulnerability that is being used by some countries in the region that are providing energy supplies, and I mean Russia, because that's what Russia did in 2022 and 2023, trying to weaponize the energy supplies, the gas supplies. And we know that today everything is weaponizable, right? Starting from economy and ending with energy, ending with access to information, what you read, in what language you read, not just what you read, but also in what language you read. And the energy poverty is not better either. So we have about 41 million of EU citizens that live in energy poverty. What means energy poverty? It means that you don't have enough resources to have sufficient heating. To heat your household. That means that basically you spend more of your income to cover this cost, which means that if you don't do that, then you are getting sick, which means that if you are getting sick, then you are affecting the economy, right? So this is a very important block that we don't have to forget about, because the European Union is going through a crisis, and we see what is happening in Germany about the factories of car producers, makers that are closing. We also know that they are relocating because of the cost of production, because they don't have access to cheap energy. And many companies are going to do that if the EU is not going to be more flexible on regulation. And I think that what Draghi has been saying, and he clearly sees what is the problem, is that the regulation should take place if we want economic growth in Europe. Now moving to another very as important block for me, at least, because I'm following these topics for quite some time, is about borders. And borders links, obviously, with migration. And I probably will not surprise you if I will tell you that migration at the moment can be both natural. You have people who are fleeing conflicts and wars. And we have the case of Ukraine, which is benefiting from the support and solidarity of the EU member states. We have more than 5 million of Ukrainians that are still more than 5 million that are still in Europe. As well as we have crises that took place before, like 10 years ago, right? We remember the crisis in 2015-16, when we have more than 1 million of people who came from Syria and other places to Europe. But apart from that, we also have orchestrated migration crisis, which is the case of Belarus that took place in 2021, when people were basically transported to Moscow or to Minsk and then bused to the border with Poland and with Lithuania and helped to illegally enter across the borders with these countries. So this is one side of the borders issue. The other side is that we have, at the border of the EU, in the neighborhood, we have two frozen conflicts. I speak about Transnistrian conflict, which you mentioned, and the frozen conflicts, or one conflict, but two regions in Georgia. It's about Zinkanell region, or South Ossetia, and Abkhazia. These territories are either controlled by Russia fully or through other indirect means, but anyway, Russia is the one that is calling the shots there. So in my view, the borders are not a good spot for the EU either, because it means costs. You have to increase the capacity of Frontex. You have to create other agencies in order to be capable to stop the illegal migration from the south. You also have wars that are either created by Russia, triggered by Russia, or by its proxies, because I believe that Syria is a proxy of Russia in the region. And then you have also, flows of migrants as well as refugees that would like to find shelter in Europe. And now moving to the third block of my presentation, which is about what I call informational environment. And here is obviously we talk about foreign information, foreign malign manipulation and interference, FIMI, right? Something which the EU started working on. We know very well that the EU has a framework for that. I know personally that there are EU institutions that are outsourcing certain functions in order to understand how Russia is conducting its disinformation and in general malign interferences in the EU's neighborhood, but as well in the EU itself. And I was looking into some statistics or some figures that could help you to understand how serious is this issue if it is not addressed properly by the EU and member states as well, because it's not only the EU that should do this job. So I was looking into the Global Risk Report for 2024, which is produced by World Economic Forum. They are presenting two graphs with the most precarious or the most urgent threats for the Western community, or in general for the world. And for the next 2 years, misinformation, which is disinformation, which is FIMI, is on the first place. And only after that comes the extreme weather, social polarization, and many other issues. Now, when they present what will be the threats for the next 10 years, misinformation is there, but it's on the 5th place, being only surpassed by extreme weather, which probably, most likely, will be the key issue apart from wars, hopefully, if Ukraine is not left alone against Russia. And I mean here the crisis management that will be necessary in order to help Spain with what happened a couple of days ago in Barcelona and Valencia, or in Austria as well. You also went through floods. So these were the 3 blocks that I wanted to present to you in order to extend a little bit the topic of security, because it's not only about the hard core or hard security. It's also about the soft areas which should be addressed in order not to become vulnerable for Russian hybrid warfare. But now mentioning Moldova, because you asked me to say a few words about Moldova, and I will just go through all these 3 blocks to explain to you how Moldova is vulnerable exactly through these 3 lenses. So Moldova has a frozen conflict right now. It cannot solve it. It really relies on what Ukraine is capable to do with regard to countering Russia. And we know very well that if Ukraine is defeated by Russia, then the Transnistrian conflict will be an open wound that Russia is going to use in order to put pressure on Moldova, and obviously creating pressure for the eastern borders of the European Union. And Moldova is a candidate state, so this is already a matter of security interest for the European Union. Moldova has been attacked like never by disinformation, which was conducted by Russia before the elections as well as throughout the elections. The referendum was a target, a special target, because it was about introducing into the constitution the European integration as an irreversible foreign policy objective of the country. And for Russia, it was important to show that the support is small. and that the EU is not capable to be attractive even in countries where it has leadership that is promoting the EU. And why I'm saying that the victory was slim, because it was really slim, and we have to look through and be honest about the result. We know that 49% of the population of the electorate, eligible electorate, took part in the elections, in the referendum. Out of this, 50 voted in favor, 50.4, which means that only 25% of the electorate actually supported the referendum, which is a constitutional referendum. So the legitimacy of this referendum isn't under big question, even if the victory is on the side of those who promoted the referendum. Why I'm saying that is that if we don't care about the hybrid, then you end up with political processes that don't have enough legitimacy, and then you have a lot of question marks from the population, which is vulnerable from different points of view, including from the point of view of economic security. And here will be the last point that I wanted to mention about Moldova. As you know, Moldova is one of the poorest countries in Europe. I don't like to say that it's my country of origin. Of course, I'm not happy with that. And probably all the elites that have been in power in Moldova are responsible for this issue. But now what Russia is doing is weaponization of poverty. And this is a concept that I really try to always mention, because we have about 1/3 of the population that lives in absolute poverty. And these are people who live in a rural area. These are people who don't have income, who probably most likely rely on remittances coming from abroad. So if you imagine that these people will vote not through their stomachs, then you are very wrong. And it will not mean that they are pro-Russian by nature or ideological. They are just driven to this situation, and they're gonna take bribes, and maybe they are gonna vote for people that are part of Russian, axis of evil or proxies, because they don't have other choice. So I wanted to finish with this point, because this brings us back to the economic security, which in my view is fundamental for the EU to be capable to allocate resources for the hard security. Without that, unfortunately, the EU is going to be the geopolitical background of other geopolitical players, including China, not only the US. And here I will stop.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Denis, for this holistic analysis, for tracing hard security back to the social cohesion, to economic security, to also a personal need of the individual, especially when it comes to poverty, and that this is also, of course, possible vector to influence a population with bribes in an election, as we have seen now, as analysis shows also for the case of Moldova, that this is also a hybrid warfare attack, the weaponization of everything, as you have mentioned, but especially also that economic aspect is very crucial in such scenarios.
Especially during the winter time.
Especially even more during the winter time, and the weaponization of energy in Moldova, we could also fill up another discussion on that, on the lessons learned also from energy dependency. However, I would also like to open the floor to the audience. Before I do that, so please already have some of your questions in mind. I'd like to ask first the question to each and every one of you, actually the same question, a very decisive question, since we can all agree that it is the time to act, it is the time to decide. I'd like to ask you for 1 or 2 key recommendations to European stakeholders in Brussels, at the capitals, on how to better navigate in these insecure times. If you would be the one in charge, what would you recommend? So probably, Judy, I will again start with you. What are your 1 or 2 key recommendations to stakeholders?
That's a horribly difficult question. But I have one suggestion. Given the lack of unity among the 27, and given that there is no real shared threat perception, the South sees the war in Ukraine very differently from the North, we should go for coalitions of the willing. we're not going to get unity on all sorts of things. We don't get the unity on a banking union, on more monetary union, on defence of security. Let's go for coalitions of the willing, like-minded coalitions of the willing.
Due to the imperfect threat perception, no unity when it comes to threat perception.
It's very interesting if you talk to the northern tier of Europe, their threat is seriously Russia. You go down to the south, it's migration, it's the Middle East, it's other issues completely. And France has a completely different view of threat perception given its role in Sahel and other issues. And I was just thinking, let's not waste our time in going for unity all the time, because it'll be elusive or we'll get down to the lowest common denominator. Let's go for coalitions of the willing. One caveat. If we go for coalitions of the willing, costs should not lie where they fall. There should be shared costs from all the 27.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll go in the same order. Yurii, your recommendations for European stakeholders on better navigating.
I will also follow up on the points mentioned by Judy in her intro, that Europe is reliant on US supplies of the kit. Invest in Ukrainian defense industry, because the first thing, currently it's at the level of 30-40%, we produce 30-40% of the potential, because we don't have enough money from Ukraine to spend them on the kit. Denmark was the first country to invest in production in Ukraine. So I think that's a way to, on the one hand, support Ukraine in the war, but also get the technologies of the future war. And actually, a small remark, because there were some questions on the military and so on. The war has changed completely. The concept of the war has changed. As an example, during the last month, living in Kyiv at the current moment, we didn't have a single night without drones, without explosions in the sky. It was not the case 2, 3, 4 years ago. So, I mean, the war is changing, technologies are changing, and they are currently being tested and developed in Ukraine. So if you want to be, and Europe wants to be up to date in terms of its capabilities, that's the way to follow and to go. If some countries are not ready to invest in lethal equipment, like the country we are sitting in, even though it's such a pity that Ukraine was divided between two empires. From one of them we cannot get rid of, the other one we cannot get involved in the business which we have. So at least what Austria can do, and countries like which are considered to be neutral, they can invest in think tanks, in non-governmental organizations, in security and defense, because learnings are there. And if I talk about understanding of the threats, understanding the way Russia conducts its hybrid operations and so on, it's a way to learn it. I mean, we do have this expertise, but unfortunately we don't have resources. The only country which supported non-governmental organizations in defense and security was the UK since 2014. Until now, there is no any other country which supported the governmental sector. That's a way to get the knowledge. And the third thing, what the Europe can do, follow the plan which was presented by our president, victory plan. And one of the things which because the sooner the war is ended in Ukraine, the less fear we'll have among populations in Europe. And the less fear we have among populations in Europe, the less ground we have for right-wing and extreme left-wing parties. Because they can use poverty, they can use misinformation, they can use everything. But they base the ideology on the fear. The longer the war lasts in Ukraine, the higher share of extreme parties will be in the parliaments in Europe. So stop the war, invest in Ukraine defense. If not, at least support non-governmental organizations.
And investing more in Ukrainian defense is already a process that is ongoing, especially due to the new European industrial defense strategy. One central aim of that strategy was also to bring the supplies closer to the demand and to invest more also in Ukraine. So I see that there is also some sort of momentum and positive development also in that direction.
Overall, quite few Ukrainian allies realized that when they were spending their money on the equipment, what even produced in their countries, first of all, the equipment was not very suited for the war, and they did not get the last technologies. So they actually lost 2 times. And now more and more countries start thinking about investing in Ukraine. Judy also mentioned, really liked your intro, thank you. I mean, Judy also mentioned this problem of interoperability, which exists in NATO countries. When Lithuanian and Latvian armies will be standing to each other, they will not be able even to communicate. Do we have a problem with interoperability in Ukraine? For sure. We have a zoo of everything. Of everything, from Soviet equipment to the we don't have up to notch, but from the equipment from the 80s and 90s. But while the West and NATO is talking about multi-domain operations, which is a new concept, how to combine all the domains, land, maritime, space, Ukraine is conducting multi-domain operations in Kursk Oblast. That's a great example. So it's a lot of the things which the West is trying to do by their exercises and so on, Ukraine is doing it every day on the battlefield. So that's a source to learn, to invest, and to get a victory.
Be mutually beneficial as well. Alina, I'd like to move to you, probably also based on your question, is peace possible? What would be your recommendation?
So I would disagree with Judy a bit. Sorry, just a bit. That you say there is no unity. I would say that after 2022, that's also as I showed, and in my research on enlargement and everything, I would say that this unity is already much better. So, and perception of security is already becoming more similar. It's still, there is no this full unity and understanding, and now with Trump presidency, this perception of security is becoming more similar. So there is also there is still a chance to try to have to find consensus. So I mean, it's better already than it was before, and I have just written a policy paper with recommendations for European decision makers what would happen after US elections. You can follow me on Twitter and read the whole policy paper, but just to mention briefly is support Ukraine, yes, to take the lead, and finally support Ukraine if no matter what and when happens with US support. So first to give a weapon from its stockpiles, then invest in its military production, then to what Ukrainians are arguing already for much time, close the sky, yes, for Ukraine. And important thing for you probably know it, but you would be shooting the same Shahed Iranian drones that the West is shooting over Israel, right? So that's not much difference to close the sky for Ukraine as well. Then isolation of Russia, stop trading with Russia, total economic isolation of Russia, then harder task, try to convince Russian partners to isolate Russia. Okay, you can convince Iran or North Korea, but try with India, China, US was trying, but yeah, that's a goal as well, to isolate Russia totally from its partners. And I think that's
quite a list of
to take responsibility. And just to end on a positive note, so I think Trump's election is a great chance for Europe to become self-reliant, independent, strong, united. So as the last time when he was elected, I hoped for this. Now with the war is here, the Trump is there, for Europe I think chance really, as That you have the time to react, yes?
Exactly.
The time to act, not to react, yeah.
Exactly.
But also to act. That's the time now, right?
Certainly a lot of food for thought for European decision makers. Thank you very much. Dennis, your recommendations.
Well,
Key.
Yeah,
key
I
recommendations.
think that what we should do in Europe and about Europe is to learn to bake cakes, our own cakes, not to wait from others to, you know, to have cakes and eat them, but rather to produce our own resources. And this is about, I will go back to quoting Draghi's or mentioning Draghi's report and the fact that we have the necessity to invest 800 billions in critical infrastructure, in critical raw material production or supplies, everything that is going to make EU stronger as well as capable to really materialize what it's so wishful, and this is strategic autonomy. That would be my first recommendation. The second one is really about learning from what is happening in Ukraine and to Ukraine, and to look at what is doing Lithuania, what is doing Poland, what is doing Romania that are bordering Ukraine. They are reacting, so they learn how to use UAVs. Or to use UAVs to protect themselves, as well as to use defense, air defense systems against UAVs that are penetrating their space. As well as not to forget about the fact that Russia is conducting sabotage against critical infrastructure in Europe. Maybe not in Austria, not yet, but we know a very serious case that happened a couple of weeks ago in Germany. And it was about critical infrastructure, it was about the airport, and it was about an airplane, and we could have seen, including victims. So we should take really seriously everything related to hybrid, as well as related to what we can really see in Ukraine. It's there, is visible, it's tangible, and we should prepare as soon as possible. And the last thing is to eliminate gray zone areas. And this is related to Moldova as well. So we have to deconflict the region. We have to understand that now is the moment when Russia is weakened, and is weakened because Ukraine is helped to defend itself against Russia. And we have to do as much as possible in order to really kick Russia out of Transnistria, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. I know that in Georgia this is more complicated because of the regime in Tbilisi, but I think that Moldova has a really good shot in reducing as much as possible the Russian influence in the separatist region of Moldova, Transnistria. And here I'll stop.
Thank you so much. I will open now the floor for questions from the audience. I see a couple. Probably we start here with the gentleman in the second row. Yeah.
Hi. Can you hear me? Okay, brilliant. My name is Christian Wind, and I'd like to ask two questions to Judy Dempsey. I would vehemently disagree with Alina's notion that, like, at least for Austria, the perception of defense threat is changing in any significant way. I guess in Austria, you would be very hard-pressed to find any politician who is actually questioning neutrality. You wouldn't find anything. And I do have the impression that the public discourse hasn't changed a bit since the invasion of Ukraine. And I guess this think tank here, and I really love the work you do, but I'm afraid that the impact on society is absolutely marginal. I do think that, like, the knowledge in Austrian society about defense issues has been stayed the same. It's not about time to act, it's about time to wake up, and then we can discuss, and then we can think. But like in Austria, we're absolutely far from the time to decide. My question is, and I'm sorry for being so long-winded, is, Judy, I've been wondering, since you are from Ireland, is there any initiative where you can, I know, any people, how they try to reflect on their thinking? And the second question, now that Trump is being elected, what will be really the future of NATO if he's pulling the plug on Article 5?
Thank you very much. We will collect a couple of questions. Probably we'll move to the gentleman here. Yes, please. And could you please also just shortly introduce yourself and ask short questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My name is Colin Munro, and I was ambassador to the OSCE from 2003 to 2007. And in the 90s, I was involved with the OSCE, NATO, and EU enlargement. First, a comment about when all this started. Immediately after after Putin became president, he reneged on the now forgotten Istanbul commitments. That is to say, in return for adapting the Treaty on Conventional Forces in Europe to the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, to accommodate Russia, Yeltsin agreed to withdraw Russian forces from Moldova and Georgia by 2001. Well, they're still there. Secondly, from a British perspective, I have to say...
I'm very sorry to have to interrupt you, but can you
You want a
ask
question?
Yes, please, because then we can take more questions from
My
the
question
audience.
really is focused on Judy Dempsey's point about the coalition of the willing. How to get one going without everybody else paying? I think that's completely unrealistic. But a coalition of the willing is the only way forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And please, here in the first row, the question for now. We'll have a second round later.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eugenia from the Atlantic Council of Albania. So I have a short comment. Yes, I have a short comment and then a question. So from what I've heard now, I have the impression that there is not a clear understanding of European security policies, and in my point of view, there are two Europes. It's the European Union and the Europe on the backyard, and I come from Albania, so I have two sons, and from Albania and Kosovo and countries like in the Balkan, there have been soldiers sent in Ukraine to fight for security, not only of Ukraine, but the whole region. And if we do this question among European countries, how would they behave? And if we think, if we take the look at NATO, for example, there is such a common perception of the threat, which is not the same amongst the European Union. But how can we overcome these two realities? If we understand the deterrence by resilience that the US is saying so much, what is happening in these two realities in the European continent? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Judy, most questions were addressed directly to you. Do you wanna take them, and then we probably can follow up on a couple of things that other speakers would also like to mention?
Extremely brief. You just don't mention the N word in Ireland, and there was a bipartisan parliamentary group invited over to the Irish Embassy in Berlin, and I was there as a think tanker. And I mentioned the N word, the NATO word, and the neutrality word. Whoa! I mean, you just don't, and the politicians don't want to raise it. And I was in Dublin recently, and there was a demonstration against the EU defence. Oh, that German von der Leyen, she wants a European army and everything. I said, what are you talking about? You even have an opt-out clause, so it's a non-starter at the moment. Trump in Article 5. I think we have to be very careful about the NATO element. It's just not about the money. So much will depend on Trump's advisors. Who's in the Pentagon, who's the security advisor, who the ambassadors are. It's too soon to jump and say, oh, he wants to get rid of NATO. NATO is a great asset for the moment. Other question. Oh, I remember covering the CFE, and no wonder Russia, Putin wants to get rid of the CFE. That's a conventional force in Europe, because then the transparency, the monitoring, the troop movements was got rid of, so he could do what he had a free hand to do, Crimea and everywhere else. So, and your point about coalitions of the willing, that was yours, yeah? Yeah. Just let me... I'm going to answer this. I actually fundamentally disagree with you on this, because I think in terms of solidarity at least, what you don't want to stigmatize countries that don't want to be part of the coalition, that don't want to be in the coalition, but let them contribute to feel that they are part of the European Union in any case, and they're contributing, and there shouldn't be this feeling, oh, this is another club and we're excluded from it. No, it should be inclusive in the sense of the financial contributions, but doesn't necessarily mean military contributions as well. I think maybe this is one way around it. And NATO, Oh, the great question on NATO. Who answered it? Who, NATO and the EU? Very briefly. Because of the American leadership inside NATO, there's all multilateral institutions have their own cultural biases and perceptions. And there's such an inbuilt military culture inside NATO, which just simply is not replicated and cannot be replicated in the EU. The EU is a trade, peace movement. NATO is not a peace movement. Thank you. Great questions.
You also would like to comment shortly? Yeah.
Just a brief comment. First of all, thanks a lot for bringing Albania and overall Balkans, because once again, for me, it was 2008, but for Europe's never again, 90s was the starting point when the war started happening in Europe. But still the key comment is about the constantly repeated statement that it's Putin's war, that with Putin, Russia changed. Being once again a Ukrainian which is saying that the war will be happening. It's not Putin's war, not at all. The most liberal, the most democratically loved president, Yeltsin, started war in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Chechnya, Georgia, Transnistria, Moldova. It's all the 90s. And then a representative of the KGB infrastructure came once again to the power. I don't know how many of you have been living in Russia or stayed for some time during the last 10 years. Half my family is living there. We don't talk much with each other because they think that I'm a Nazi. But I did live there for 1.5 years. It's Russianism is the state ideology, and it has nothing to do with Putin. So my recommendation would be, as our president once wore a T-shirt, make Russia small again. And then you will have so many more opportunities in the world. You will have less hybrid threats, you will have less wars, you will have less interference into elections, you will have less muddling in Africa, in all the regions of the world, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. This is a small comment. It has nothing to do with Putin. Putin is just the representative of the whole system and of the people who share his ideology. Trust me, as someone who has spent some time there.
Okay, we have a second round of questions. We will start here in the front. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you hear me? Yes. I hope so. So I study political science in Vienna. So it's in German, that's why I will try to speak you to English. It's not very good, but my point is, it's really wonderful for me why this forum named Time to Decide, Time to Act and European Future, because actually I would like to talk about Ukrainian future. Which guarantees do Ukrainians have, and why do we think that Ukrainians are ready to fight? Who told it? I mean, right now we have very, very big problems with mobilization. So people from 25 years old had to go to war. They are not willing to go to war, but they had to. You say that we want to fight for Europe. Where is Europe? Its rights, Europe Europe values, yes? In Ukrainian, we don't have rights. Men cannot go abroad. They are forced to live there. Yeah. They're forced to be in Ukraine and die like a meat. And we have to fight for Europe values. And I would like to know how long it's going to take till Europe get this unity, and why Europe thinks that Ukraine is willing to be a shield to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there were some more questions on this side. Yes, please, here in the third row.
Beautiful. I also want to talk a little bit about, I will sit then. Thank you for this panel. I'm also Ukrainian. So I'm from NGO, International Community. We work with youth here mainly. And my question is, we talked today a lot about security. We also talk about threats and fear and how fear is used for political campaigning. And how can we actually change this narrative of fear regarding security to hope? How can we actually promote it? How can we actually change the security perception in the population of Europe, in eyes of Europeans?
Thank you very much. And I think there is also one question here in the middle from the lady in the gray suit. Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Susan Perkins. I work as a translator and as a teacher of English, usually at institutes and universities. I have a question which maybe has partly been answered by Yurii, but my question is, if something happened to Putin, if he fell out of a window, because Russians tend to fall out of windows somehow, but if something happened to him, would that change the course of the war? Do you think the war would still go on in the same sort of way? Although you say it's not Putin's war, but we keep hearing it's Putin's war. Mm-hmm. My second question or comment would be to Judy. She warned us that we're all in for a bad time. Okay, the we here obviously, and we have to act, the we obviously refers to governments and to politicians and to maybe military leaders. But what can I, as a small individual person, do? Do I rush out and buy tins of baked beans to put in the cellar? Do I go and stock up with mineral water? What can I, as an individual, do? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'd like to start in the reverse order now, because we have heard from you, Judy, and you, Yurii, before. Alina, do you want to take some of the questions that were posed?
Yeah, I can start. I can start with the last question, what you can do personally. Yes, that's the question for all of us. Some people, when I come to Ukraine, they blame me. I'm here, and the war is still going on for them there. And recently, two my good friends told me, Alina, you're there, you're talking to international community, you're a scholar, why are not you shouting to the world? We need to stop this war, we don't want to die, why they're not helping us more? And I feel guilty, yes, what I can do more? I can, as a scholar, I can make my research, I can talk to you people, I can inform as much people as I can. Yeah, if I had in each country of your citizenship, you can go to politics. And I'm a member of different NGOs, and I'm for years trying to change something via NGO, but I always hear that if you want to do a change, that's the only way to go to politics. So that's the biggest advice, to go to politics. The smaller, to talk to your friends, to your family, try to inform them, try to inform, we're talking about Austria, not this discussion not going on, and I just thought, yeah, here, people who joined here, we probably have the same opinion, right? So to reach out to people who have different opinion. And just to talk to people, to inform them, to write blogs, to go to TV, and just to talk to each other, try to find common solution. Mm-hmm. But I'm also thinking about this. And yeah, when the war started, I was looking at the first year of the war, 2014-15, and then this invasion started. And I was also, what can I do? And my family is there. I don't want them to die. And I'm also visiting Ukraine. What can I do? That's my research. I'm doing this. What I can do as a scholar? That's a question probably many of us have. But there is some small steps we can do. How to change fear for hope? Yes, that's again to work together and So I think it's a bit better now, this understanding. And regarding Austria, before 2022, we remember Austria was always protesting against the continuation of sanctions against Russia. And now we do not, now we have only Hungary sometimes making the voice, but in the beginning and until now, this consensus among all EU countries is there, sanctions are there, at least in such small scene, some kind of isolation of Russia is there, and still there is cooperation in some places. And again, just small point that Austria constructively abstained in sending lethal weapon to Ukraine. So yes, so there is something is there, hope is there. Then if Putin disappears, yeah, so look at the statistics. Levada Center, the recent opinion poll, they answer questions differently. And for example, one thing I want to mention, there was a question, if Putin stops the war, would you support the decision of your president? And then majority say yes, they would support. But if Putin stops the war but gives occupied territories to Ukraine, would you support it? Then no, majority says no. So you can look and understand how yes, people still have this Russia's mentality, right? But you can somehow play with it. You can, but as I said, there is no civil society. There is no better leader. If Putin disappears, then someone much worse can come. It can be worse. And some say that someone. A child of some of his surroundings, and so obviously there is a fear in the West. If Putin disappears, there will be a chaos and war, and what will happen with nuclear weapons. So this fear is always there. Yes. So the issue is they have nuclear weapon, and can someone crazier? So you never know. But yes, currently do not see any party, any movement, anyone who can be better there, right? So no better possibilities. That Ukrainians are fighting. So you see, it's now this number of Ukrainians who want to suffer and to fight the war until the end, until the whole liberation of territories is a bit less, but it's still the majority. So still the majority are ready to fight, are ready to get the whole territory back. And so for Ukrainian leaders, it would be politically impossible then to sign any other agreement and go against the population. But again, yeah, I think we have a hope with all these pressing issues with Trump and the war, and I was looking at the EU decision to give Ukraine candidate country status. So it's a discussion. In the beginning, also many countries were against it. The discussions, and in Europe, it's important to find consensus that everybody agrees. You're giving something. You understand each other's interests, you're giving something for them. For instance, for Austria, I can mention why Austria supported giving candidate status to Ukraine, because Austrian demand to move Western Balkans forward was followed. So we can still discuss and find our democratic solution in Europe. You can convince people, and I'm hopeful that now it will happen, but what can I do? I'm Ukrainian. We hope for Europe. We hope for discussion for democracy, for these values.
Thank you so much, Denis. I think that you also wanted to comment on a couple of the questions that were raised.
Just two of them. One is about how to create hope, and I believe that this is also a strategy that the EU has. At the same time, is something that is pursued by Zelensky, by the presidential office in Kiev, and it's about using European integration as a motivation. as a motivation for the country to actually stand against the Russian aggression, as well as to modernize the country and create the resilience inside, as well as to give a hope for those who are abroad as refugees at the moment, so that they can return when the war is over. So I believe that European integration is a vehicle for this creation of hope, but it also depends on how Ukraine is helped in order to progress. You know, it's a very time-consuming, it's resource-consuming process. I have talked to Ukrainian experts that told me that there is no sufficient human resources to create this, army of public servants that can, for such a big country, to make it happen. And the second point, which is very important in terms of creating the narrative and setting the agenda, it's about the communication that is being conducted. We know very well that wars are not only fought on the battleground, they are also fought in our minds, and they're fought through media, through information, and therefore we have to invest in strategic communication. But this should happen with the help of the EU External Action Service. We have 140 EU delegations across the world, and we know for sure that they are not doing enough in order to promote the point of view of the EU when it comes to Ukraine and when it comes to strategic interest of Ukraine related to the European Union. I believe that this is a miss, and in my view, if we want to really create these coalitions of goodwill that Judy was referring to, including from countries that are in global south, then I'm sorry, but we have to create to mobilize all the voices, both in Ukraine as well as in the EU, in NATO, in other like-minded countries, in order to create this, first of all, narrative of urgency. It's not only about Ukraine, but it's about international law and international order, as you mentioned at the very beginning, or other speakers. So this would be 2 points that I would focus on primarily.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Judy, some last words from you. Yeah.
It's a great question. Thank you. I have one nagging thing in my head. Why we don't support Ukraine? I mean, collectively, the West. And when I ask officials in Berlin this question, of why won't you supply the terrorist weapon systems? We don't want to escalate. Excuse me, who's doing the escalating? But it's something much more fundamental. The Europeans are afraid of Russia. And the Europeans still view Eastern Europe and Ukraine, I hope I'm wrong, Yurii, through the prism of Russia. And I find that very depressing. Thank you for asking.
And that's why they gave 3 days, because they using the lenses of Russia for Ukraine.
Exactly.
Very different, as the result shows. I can go into depth, but it's another couple of hours. Small comments also, since I jumped in. How can we change security perception from fear to hope? If you have high blood pressure from eating too much sugar, I think that you need to eat less sugar. So if you have a fear because of the war, you need to stop the war and don't look for any other recipes. Small remark, we miss the point that it's not anymore a war of only Russia. Another big country joined Russia in the war. Somehow it's called Northern Korea, but somehow it's still omitted.
I thought China.
I think, if you look at the sponsor of the two. And if Putin jumps out of window, I don't know what will be, but I think that this time the West need to think at least about possible scenarios.
Exactly.
And not to repeat the mistake of 1991 when the West saved Russia because they didn't have a scenario how to deal with a world without Russia or with a world without the Soviet Union. And that's why the West was trying to convince Ukraine to stay in the Soviet Union until the last moment without understanding Ukraine once again. But still, the West saved Russia. Russians still believe that the West destroyed Russia. This time, at least we need to have these scenarios. One of my roles at the current of the Ministry of Defense, we are doing two things. Working with technologies, and I would disagree that men are used as meat. I joined the army in February 2022. I was an artillery in different units, never been a warrior before that. And somehow I still can work and be beneficial within the armed forces with the skills which I have. And technology is a way for us. And so it's one of my focuses. The other focus is thinking about the future and about potential scenarios. If the West cannot spend 100 bright minds to think about potential scenarios for Russia, then Ukrainians, once again, need to do this homework also for the West. But we need not to repeat this mistake once again. Let's not try to save Russia until the last moment. That's what we are currently trying to do now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thanks for these very honest last words. Unfortunately, we do not have any more time for additional questions because we have to end on time punctually. I would like to thank you for your wonderful questions, for engaging in these discussions. I would also like to thank at this point our partners for the European Forum, especially the Vienna School of International Studies, the Diplomatic Academy, but also the Wilfried Martens Center, who is supporting this initiative. I would like to remind you as well that we will continue tomorrow. So this was the day one, this was the kickoff discussion. Tomorrow we will go further in depth on both Ukraine, but also mentioning the Middle East. There will be a discussion and a panel also on that. So we will start again at 9 o'clock tomorrow here, and it will continue until 2. But first and foremost, or most importantly, I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers for your great input, for your expertise, for being with us here today. So please join me in giving a big hand of applause to our speakers. Thank you. Yes.